much of our human history has been people trying to get away from, flee from oppression, flee from abuse, flee. That Venice is like this piece of light on the earth that's been there for a very long time, of a lot of people who were fleeing oppression, and then they created this incredible island that makes some of the most incredible art on the planet. And there is something about that I hope could be the story for the whole world. I thought about this several times when I've been there, that if Venice can exist and even be always challenged by the water that laps everywhere, then the whole planet, I feel like we have the ability to get past this rough node that we are on, the timeline that feels so precarious and dangerous. And that is my greatest prayer. And so I would go back to Venice while it is still beautiful in here.
Mike is in Montreal. Hey, Mike, go ahead.
Thanks so much, George and Linda.
Hi.
Boy, I had so many interesting points, but we're almost out of time, so I'll have to do some editing and make it down to 2 quick ones. Firstly, in relation to Fukushima, a good friend of mine, actually my best friend for over 35 years, works with a scientist who developed a compound. It's a wax compound that absorbs radiation incredibly well. In fact, he proposed after Chernobyl, it's been around this long, after Chernobyl, he wanted to seal that thing off and prevent any radiation leakage from it, and he got no interest from anyone. And more recently, my best friend himself, after endless emails, phone calls, snail mail, everything he could do to try and contact somebody at the UN or anywhere, he went himself personally down to the UN in New York to deliver a package of information on how he could seal off Fukushima and prevent any radiation leakage. Nobody would talk to him. Nobody showed any interest. And that's one of the things that really, really scares me about this world is, do they really want to fix anything?
Well, you're asking an interesting question in the context also of something that I run into, and I'm sure other people do too. So much science is dependent upon federal money. And labs can live or die on whether they keep getting lab research grants. So what I have found is that often anything that is new, that is outside of whatever the boundaries and the reasons for funding are for any given lab, it just won't even be touched. And I don't know how we change that, because what has happened is that the federal government and its biases, good or bad, are now what is the tail driving the dog of so much science.
Right. Point 2 that I wanted to make in relation to space travel, the laser sail idea is a fascinating one. The solar sail idea is something that's been around for a long, long time. In fact, I have an article from Popular Science back in the 50s talking about solar sails. We're still talking about fairly Stone Age technology compared to what's out there in the universe. And because of recent discoveries of the God particle and more recently gravity waves, we have the ability to travel at incredibly faster speeds. The limiting factor, for example, on the solar sail is mass. The heavier the object of the spacecraft becomes, the harder it is to accelerate, the harder it is to get it up to speed.
Which is exactly why Professor Lubin is focusing on these small sizes that will be so light that getting them up to 25% to 30% of the speed of light in minutes is absolutely feasible. They know that this is not a hard problem. And then is the excitement. Really, this is the part that has emerged just in the last 10 years that makes this so exciting, and that is the so-called iPhone technology, meaning the compacting of so much sophisticated technology in a small space that could go on this wafer spacecraft and go at 25% 30% the speed of light, and really could be at Alpha Centauri in 17 years, sending back tremendous amounts of information to Earth the entire time.
I wouldn't want to take that trip, Linda. Would you? 17 years in a spaceship?
Well, I don't know, but that would be at the end of this century or getting into the next century, because you've got the
Robots
weight and
and
size
robots.
of humans. But in the meantime, I think it's terrifically exciting to think about exploring the cosmos with these kinds of wafer spacecraft that are going to be sending back so much information, and maybe finding out why the universe seems silent to us, because there's something we haven't found.
Let's go to John in Athens, Alabama. Hi, John. Go ahead.
Hey, George. How are you today?
Good. Thank you.
Hey, I have just a couple quick questions. I'll take my answer off the air. Maybe sounds kind of silly, but I'm curious, how are we going to steer something like this? We're shooting something with a laser or photons. We have to be shooting in a straight line. And my next question is, why couldn't we put a laser on this thing to propel itself?
Steering and the laser. Go.
All right. Well, I'm telling you, I love you guys that are coming in
They're
with
the
these
best.
really cool questions.
Couple minutes to go, Linda.
And I will have more discussions with Professor Lubin about this. He and I are working on an illustration. And I will try to get very specific answers to that question of a direction, and could it carry its own laser? And I will keep reporting at earthfiles.com. So you guys who are asking these good questions, go to Earth Files, and you will find answers from Professor Lubin there in the next day, 2 or 3.
Joe in the Bronx. Let's squeeze you in here. Joseph, go ahead.
George, how are you? Good show. Linda, I wanted to ask you, now, as far as the role of light is concerned in UFO travel, how important do you think that light could be for UFOs to traverse the universe? And also, I read a book a long time ago called Beam Riders, where individuals were able to ride beams of light through space.
Well, it's another very good question. I would say that if, in fact, the guy from MIT who was working on ring lasers was correct back in the 80s, that we're dealing with intelligences that can bend space-time, they have control on gravity, then we are not talking about being limited to 186,000 miles a second. If you can bend space-time, you're moving point to point. It's like a whole other order.
Linda, in a minute that we have left, give everybody info about where you're going to be and where they can show up.
Thank you. I'm at Eureka Springs at the Ozark UFO Conference. Gorgeous spring there, April 8th through 10th, 2016. I'm the keynote speaker on the evening of Friday. And Eric Von Doniken is the keynote speaker on Saturday. So he and I will be complimenting each other with our keynotes. And I will be in Dulce, New Mexico, May 14 to 15, talking about what may or may not be underground there. And then June 3 to 6, the wonderful Contact in the Desert in Joshua Tree. It's been exciting the last 2 years I've been there. This year they're talking about even more people, more everything. And George, it can be fantastic. It's going to be that first week in June. The weather, if it's nice, those breezes there are some of the best in the world.
We're celebrating my birthday that weekend out there, Linda.
All right. Well, maybe we can cheer with champagne together.
It'll be fun, huh? Linda Moulton out. Thank you so much. For Nathan Staten, Dan Galanti, Gina Salvati, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesor, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borals, and George Knapp. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.